again, thank you so much for coming out tonight.
Wow, this is very exciting to be here. It's my first time here. It will not be my last time. And it's a tremendous pleasure to be able to introduce the speaker tonight, Ann Dolinko. She was a student of mine. She wrote her dissertation under my direction entitled Performing the Self, Subjectivity, Feminist Theory, and Political Praxis. And I have to say, I think I learned as much from her as she learned from me, on this topic. She did Marx and Foucault and Freud, but she also did Jane Flax and Judith Butler. I remember that vividly. Anne has been teaching at Shimer College since then, which is a great book school, and she tells me she's been struggling for 18 years to make sure that work by women and people of color count as great books. She's also been active in her community with the Jewish synagogue, Reconstructionist synagogue there. She's taking 3 of her students to Seneca Falls for a conference coming up. Well, I could go on, but you want to hear from me. So it's my great pleasure to give you Ann Dolinko.
Everybody. This is exciting because one of the things about Shimer is our largest class size is 12, so I'm not used to this. So usually we sit around a small table and have discussions about texts, and just giving even a talk at all it's not what we usually do in terms of a lecture. So I want to, because of what I titled it, Everything You Want to Know About Feminism But We're Afraid to Ask, I want to make sure to leave ample time for questions. So I'm going to kind of look at the clock and gauge. I'm not sure how long this will take, but I mean, I have a lot of notes that I may elaborate on or not, depending if you all seem interested. But I can go, there's a lot of things I'm open to asking questions about. So I'm really glad to see everybody. Can you hear me okay? I know not hearing me is usually never a problem. And I have to warn you, I'm very nearsighted, so sometimes I'm going to be holding the paper very close to my face, which I know looks odd, but my students are all very used to that look of mine. So let me first just give you a really brief outline of what I'm going to talk about, and then I'll go into each section, but just so we can kind of stay on the same page. I want to talk about why feminism is relevant today, define what feminism is, give a brief history of feminism, and give a small account of the different types of feminist theory, and talk about how feminism is relevant to our daily lives, and finally talk about feminism and the Western intellectual tradition, since you look surprised, Tim. Could that possibly be the case? And I don't remember if David said, but my doctorate is in philosophy, so the Western intellectual tradition is something that's very near and dear to my heart, and also Shimer College is traditionally a great books college, but as David said, I expand drastically what we count as a great book. But thinking about how feminism and race studies and whatnot fits in with a great books curriculum is something that I think about a lot. So let me start with, I just want to and I'm sorry, I forgot your name, the woman who was up here before. Tammy. So Tammy gave you the up note. I'm going to give you the down note, okay? Because I think we have a lot of work to do, and I've basically dedicated my life to challenging patriarchy, racism, and multiple forms of oppression. And what I really hope to do, well, I hope you'll all join me. So, to me, that's what this is about. That's what my passion is. My training is as a philosopher. My mission in life is to challenge oppression. And I feel like that's how we need to lead our lives, is active engagements to challenge oppressive systems. So in order to kind of buoy, it seems like I don't have to buoy your need to challenge oppression, because I can tell by the crowd. Sometimes I talk to people, they're like, we don't need feminism anymore. We're post-feminism and we're post-racism, blah, blah, blah. So, but because I didn't know who was going to be here, I'm going to read some things about kind of where we are now and why I think talking about feminism in 2014 is as relevant now as it would have been if I was standing in front of you in 1960. So, why feminism is relevant today. The mass media is going to have you believe we're post-feminism, we're over all that, everything's fine now. They're going to give you a few cover stories on one woman who's doing fine. Often one time they might find a woman of color and say, see, we have no problem. Everything's okay. It's not. And we need to challenge those systems. So every one of these, some facts and figures. Every 2 minutes a woman is raped in this country. Rape is still widespread in war zones. The United States does not has a ban on funding abortions in war zones. These are all topics right now that are being currently debated in your legislature, which is why I mention them, because we need activism to challenge these issues. They're all things that are currently being discussed. So this isn't something you just hear these numbers and say nobody's doing anything about them. We have to do something about it. There's 25,000 to 32,000 women in the U.S. become pregnant from rape every year. Every year, yet 1 in 4 teenagers do not know about emergency contraception, and only 17 states in the entire United States offer emergency contraception in emergency rooms. We live in a world in which we are about to engage in our 3rd war in Iraq. I guess in some ways we are engaged in it already. And while that might not seem obvious to you as a feminist issue, I hope to show you that it indeed is. We live in a world with tremendous racial violence that we allow to just kind of wash over us. Driving home today, I hear this, 4 college students were killed in a bus accident. It was a mass, killing. There's students killed, there's people killed all the time that we don't even hear about on the news. So these are all feminist issues. And we have environmental degradation. I told you I was going to bring things down a little bit. I'm optimistic that we will change things, but I see a lot of problems that we have to seriously engage in. And the environmental degradation is something that's obviously at a crisis point, and it is a feminist issue. The United States Congress is 20% female. That is shocking. 20% female, 2014. 20% female. We need to examine ourselves as a collective human community, and feminism is a crucial part of that examination. And I really feel that strongly, that we are a collective human community, and all these aspects fit together, and it's us working together that can bring about justice. One thing I want to just say as a brief aside, there's often the media, one of the games they like to have us play is what's more important. There's feminism, but what about, racial justice, and what about the economic justice, and what about the environment? That's a game of the oppressor to keep everybody who's oppressed, fighting about which is more important, as opposed to banding together and working towards changing the dominant system. And that's really crucial. So try not to get brought down into that, but I'm fighting for this issue, and I'm fighting for this issue. If you're fighting for social justice, we're working together. And that's what's crucial. And it's the media, the mainstream media, that likes to try to keep us, at loggerheads, like, well, you're about women, I'm about this. Don't let them suck you into that. Let me define feminism now. So I hope I've convinced you why I believe we need to talk about feminism. Now, some definitions. Feminism, as I see it, encompasses all the aspects of our lives. It's about our bodies, it's about our relationships, it's about our personal and political life, it's about our work life, and it's about our spiritual life. And that's all aspects of who we are. It's crucial to understand that feminism is against sexism and patriarchy. It in no way is against men. The idea that feminism is against men is just another false trope that's introduced to keep us fighting with each other and also to divide the social justice movement. Feminism is about challenging hierarchies, and all hierarchies that limit our lives. And that's economic hierarchies, it's racial hierarchies, it's gender hierarchies. So feminism is about challenging hierarchies. And if there's one thing you take away from this, I hope that sinks in. It's not about men versus women. It's about opening up possibilities for how we could be human beings. It's about challenging all forms of domination, such as patriarchy, capitalism, racism, anti-Semitism, and environmental degradation. A definition that I particularly like is by Bell Hooks, and if you haven't read her, I highly recommend her. She's probably one of my favorite authors. And she has a wonderful, lovely, small book called Feminism is for Everybody, if you want to learn more about feminism, but I'm always giving it to people. So it's very short and it's amazing. Feminism is for everybody. Here's a definition that she offers. Feminism is a movement to end sexism and sexist exploitation and oppression. That doesn't seem like something that should be vilified, that should be made, that if you say that, I mean, there are many people today, college students, older people, who are afraid to say they are a feminist. And when you think about what it means is ending sexist oppression and hierarchy, it's really chilling that people are afraid to say proudly they're a feminist. And that they think that somehow it means that they're angry, man-hating, horrible people. This microphone's going to get in the way of my hand gestures. So let me give you now a brief history of feminism. And let me say, too, I personally do not like that idea that you've all probably heard about is the waves, you know, their first wave and second wave and third wave. And the first wave, the reason I don't like that idea is because feminism is a constant movement for social change. It doesn't come and go. It's just when the media decides to cover it and when it gets more attention. But it's always there. So I'm very much reluctant to buy into the wave theory. What I'm going to tell you about is, and I'm focusing more on feminism in the United States. I want to talk to you about kind of its inception there. For those of you who like to keep score with wave theory, this would be considered first wave. And it's also important to me because I'm about to go to Seneca Falls. So one of the first feminists, this is before Seneca Falls. One of the first feminists is Mary Wollstonecraft, and she wrote a book called The Vindication of the Rights of Women, and she wrote it in 1792. So people who tell you that feminism is suddenly this thing that some radical people discovered in the 1960s in the United States, 1792, and she was taking on Rousseau at the time, okay? So this very idea that this is this new radical thing that people discovered and supposedly got very excited about burning their bra, that's just bullshit, basically. I can't think of a more academic way to say that. I mean, I could, but I don't feel like it. And one of the things I want to say about Vindication of the Rights of Women, it's now also included as a great book in the Shimer core curriculum. In that book, what Wollstonecraft argues is for the simple idea that women be considered rational. And in 1792, you needed to argue that. In 2014, I think we still need that argument. We still have to prove and claim our rationality. And if you want to read an early and really well-articulated argument that women are rational, look at the Vindication of the Rights of Women. She's reacting to Rousseau, who many of you might have heard of, one of the founders of contract theory. Rousseau says, by nature, women obey, and by nature, men command. He says this in writing. This is not me reading into the text. This is one of the founding documents of contract theory, which we base much of our current political system on. Now we're going to go to the first Women's Rights Convention, which was held in Seneca Falls, New York, on July 19th, 1848. at that convention, they read something called the Declaration of Sentiments, the Declaration of Rights and Sentiments. It was written by Susan B. Anthony and Lucretia Mott. It was modeled on the Declaration of, what's it called? Independence. I couldn't remember that was called. Independence, that's what it's called. It was modeled on the Declaration of Independence. And what's interesting about this document is, again, feminism, that first official wave of feminism is often equated with women get the right to vote. That was a minor point. That was one of the last points they added to the Declaration of Sentiments, and they weren't even sure if that was what they wanted to ask for. Not because they weren't radical, but because they thought that artificially truncated the possibilities of what feminism is about. So one of the things they called for in the Declaration of Sentiments, very short document, very powerful, is social, civil, and religious rights for women. One of the main things they talked about was how under religion and under marriage, women are subjected. And that whole idea about how so much of our contract theory, remember Rousseau? Rousseau, Locke, Hobbes, the big contract theorists, all Shimer students know about contract theory, that one of the crucial aspects of contract theory is the private sphere and the public sphere. And what became political was the public sphere. And guess who wasn't in it? Women. So all of those issues, like who you marry, who you have sex with, who the hell you could beat up, who gets money, that was all considered, that's not political. Let's talk about who gets property. And that became the trajectory of our traditional political theory. So that's very important to notice where, if you really take feminism seriously, it really shakes up that whole distinction of the public-private sphere. I've gotten beyond my notes. So that was just a little aside. Going back to the Seneca Falls, and by the way, when I was there at Seneca Falls, I expected it to be like this big, kind of a shrine and all these people there. And it was very sadly, this rundown town that was hardly anything. I mean, I expected this Mecca. I mean, it is now a national park, and the church where they held this, the first convention, you can go into it, and it's to me, it was really moving to be in there. But the press at the time, this is during the convention, right after the convention, 1848, the press ignored and ridiculed the women's movement. They printed a lot of cartoons to make fun of it, talked about how women were going to abandon their babies and not be good mothers. Some of these tropes might sound familiar to how the press continues to cover the women's movement. And Frederick Douglass, who I hope some of you have heard of, another author read at Shimer College, he was one of the few people to publish in his paper the following quote. And his paper was called The North Star. And I want to read you this quote. And this was remarkable for the time because most of the mainstream press was not covering, they were mocking the women's movement. Frederick Douglass says, "All political rights which it is expedient for men to exercise, it is equally so for women. All that distinguishes man as an intelligent and accountable being is equally true for woman. And if that government only is just, which governs by the free consent of the governed, there can be no reason in the world for denying to woman the exercise of the elective franchise or a hand in making and administering the laws of the land." So, and he stood out, and that took a lot of courage because he himself was African-American, freed slave, who didn't have a lot of clout on his hand in terms of traditional American society. And in addition to talking about equal access to education and to the public sphere, a very surprising thing to me when I first started reading feminist theory is that all the way back in 1868 was the slogan, equal pay for equal work. Again, something people think came about in the 1960s. 1868, Susan B. Anthony published in her paper called The Revolution. This is what she wrote. I'm not going to read the whole quote, but basically the idea was that she used the phrase equal pay for equal work. Sojourner Truth, in a speech she gave in response to what happened when African American men got the right to vote and African American women did not. One of the points she brought up was that we need equal pay for equal work, and African American women are going to get subjugated if they don't get paid as much as African American men. So these ideas about equal pay for equal work and about how we're just supposed to be patient and it'll happen, don't believe it. Because patience is not going to bring about social change. I'm not a patient person about this. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the different kinds of feminism. One of the main distinctions is between radical and liberal feminism. Liberal feminism would be a lot of the things I'm telling you about, like with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Mary Wollstonecraft. And the idea there is that you work to change the system. You work to change the legal system. You work to change the systems that exist within society. Pay, voting, right to employment, that type of thing. Radical feminism is the idea that you change the system. It's just the same with any liberal versus radical group. Again, I think too much time is spent arguing about which is more important. I say we need both all the time. I think we need to be working to get equality within a system. At the same time, we try to challenge the whole structure of the system. And I think that's something, too, that it's not worth wasting too much time fighting about which one you're working on. A lot of activists like to be like, oh, well, you're working on, getting this bill passed. That's so passé. I'm going to this activism to overthrow the government. You need to do both. We need people working together to engage in these activities. And by working together, I mean, I'm grateful that somebody's legislating, what's it called, when you lobby, that somebody's lobbying my congressperson while I might be at a Occupy rally or something like that. We need both. And I could go into it, and I will in questions if you want. I don't really want to now. There's a lot of academic distinctions about the different kind of feminism. There's post-structuralist feminism, there's global feminism, there's post-structuralist, global, what are some others? Liberal, socialist. There's a lot of minute academic distinctions. I can tell you about them in the questions if you want. Also, there's a really nice book by Rosemary Tong called Feminist Thought, which is a nice, I don't know why you laughed at that one. Do you know that book? By Rosemary Tong, which outlines these different types of feminist theory. If you want to know, if you're curious, I mean, my own training with David was as a post-structuralist feminist, because why not work with a Marxist to work on your dissertation on post-structuralist feminism? But that's my own academic orientation, is post-structuralist feminist. Judith Butler would be a post-structuralist feminist. Some of the critiques about post-structuralist feminists, I think, are simplistic and misguided, is that we're not socially engaged and we don't care about really changing what the situation is. All we care about is manipulating language. I can manipulate language very well. I care a lot about changing the political situation. They are not exclusive. Where am I? So feminism, one of the crucial things is feminism is about opening up possibilities for who we can be. And that, to me, is the main thing about what feminism is. And women, part of that is to give women more opportunities in the public sphere, certainly, but another huge part of it is to give men more opportunities in the private sphere. It's to break down that barrier. It's to get over this idea in this country that masculinity means being powerful, dominating. That's what gets us into expressing ourselves through war and through football and through some of the very aggressive activities. We need to open up other possibilities for how one can engage in manhood. And that is a feminist issue. Let's see, so men allowed to be nurturing. And another crucial aspect about this is to restructure society so that we can make this all possible. We need to restructure society so that we can, sorry, I'm distracted too. Hey, David, it's really hard. David, tell him to go outside. David, it's really hard to hear. Could you go out there? I love him, but he can't hear. All right, so you're welcome. Remember I told you feminism is about working together as a community. This is what I mean. This is feminism in action. Do it with love, but be forceful. So, all right, so I lost where, okay, so it's about, so feminism is about restructuring society to open up possibilities of how we can be human. And that is not an easy thing, because our society, especially our capitalist society, is very invested in a very narrow parameter of how we can express our humanity. And one of the things that's crucial about a capitalist society, and especially a capitalist society based on certain ideas of hegemony, is to make sure that you think you need to buy a lot of products so that you can conform to certain standards of how you're supposed to be. And if you'll notice too, many of our products, an insane amount of our products, are gendered. Everything from the toothpaste to, think about how insane that is, especially for children. Gendered toothpaste, gendered toothbrushes, gendered shampoo. This is insanity. But it's a way to keep you spending so that you can express your gender adequately, because the price to pay for not expressing your gender in socially conforming ways can be violent. And we tend to be very violent as a society to people who do not socially conform to what we think of our accepted gender norms. So, again, feminism is about, I think I'm in another part of my outline. Let me just see what I told you. Okay, so now I told you the different kinds of feminism. Now I want to talk to you about how feminism is relevant to our daily lives. I've already talked about some of that, but I want to give you some specifics. To me, being a feminist is an act of everyday life. I feel strongly that we need to live our everyday lives to move towards justice. And every day we need to be engaged in something that's going to bring about justice. Justice isn't something you work for on the weekends. Justice isn't something you do after you graduate, after you retire. Justice is something that you need to work on every day. It can be something small. It can be a way that you challenge a gender norm, a way that you challenge a racial stereotype, but you need to be engaged in bringing us towards social justice daily. So some of the specifics. In terms of ways to engage in feminism on a daily life. How we speak. Anybody who's my student knows gender-neutral language. Do not refer to human beings as man. We are not all men. Half of us are women. Some people don't want to declare whether they're a man or a woman. That's okay too. We cannot keep talking about mankind, man drones, the man on the moon, man, man, man. Notice that the man drones one is one that really bothers me too, because it's a more contemporary use of technology and we've gendered it. There's not even anybody in the drone. We're killing somebody with technology itself. We don't need to give it a gender, but we do. So think about the use of language. I think that's much more crucial. I think sometimes, I get this all the time, the eye roll. You know what I mean? No, what I know is that every time you say man for human, you are re-inscribing man as the norm. And that's what needs to change. Every time we do that, we re-inscribe that the norm is male. And if you notice, I noticed this more when I became a mother, which, now we've had 14 years to adjust to that, but how stuffed animals, they're always isn't he cute? When we see animals at the zoo, isn't he cute? Our default is man. Our default is male. And as long as our default is male, our normative idea of the human is going to be male. And that's something that, in the subtle thing of changing our language, we can really open up what we think of as what counts as human. So, language. I also feel very strongly about this in terms of any of you who are religious or how we pray. God is not gendered. I don't care what religion you're in. Nor do we necessarily need to reinvoke hierarchies when we pray. I think it's really crucial to open up how we think about our spirituality and to allow that to have non-gendered connotations. How we raise children. Again, there's many, many, many examples, but parenting, I wouldn't say, I'm fairly optimistic because I do believe if we work together, we will overthrow patriarchy. But any idea that I had that things had changed a lot were wiped out when I had my husband and I procreated. It's like, here's this little being, and the pressure to gender her was intense. And we put so much pressure on how you're allowed, the very, very narrow parameters of how we allow our children to express their gender. And that's really crucial, because when you think about it, go to the toy aisle. You've all seen it. The pink toys and the blue toys. But again, it's not just the toys. It's the toothpaste and the clothes and the classes and the, just a myriad of things that when you really stop to think, what sane society genders their toothbrushes? That's a pretty insane thing. And it's also very connected with capitalism. How we shop. Again, everything is gendered. How we pray. How we think of romance. Romance has been so co-opted by gender norms, right? That this idea of not especially now, I think I just know about this because having a teenager, and the thing about I just learned about this, so it's a little raw to me right now. This whole proposal thing online, watching proposals on YouTube, and the whole idea that he's going to pop the question, and that we celebrate marriage is kind of wow, we have to think about what kind of gender norms we're perpetuating in our idea of romance. It doesn't mean that you don't have love. It means that our ideas of love don't have to necessarily be co-opted by capitalism, by purchasing things, and by reestablishing one person as more in charge than the next. This is another little one, how we dominate the globe. That's clearly, I jumped from buying diamonds and doing proposals, but dominating the globe is a feminist issue. Again, that's this idea of we appropriate. It's a very masculine idea of how you assert your humanity. Bacon talks about raping the earth. We appropriate, we rape, we conquer, we take. Those are very masculine ideas that we need to change because they are leading to, they're social destruction, wide-scale social destruction. If you read about how we talk about bombing, it's very much in gendered language. We are going to take them out. We're going to dominate them. We're going to get them. We're going to win. It's very much, if you intersperse the talking heads telling you why you should bomb Syria and Iraq and intersperse those with your NFL commentators, very similar language is being used. And it's similar ideas to how we express masculinity and domination. And again, this also gets to environmental degradation. We think about taking over, dominating, drilling, taking. Remember I said one of the major things about feminism is how to live more in harmony with ourselves as human beings. And part of that harmony is how to live with ourselves, with our fellow humans on the earth. So let me say a bit now about the last part in terms of feminism in academia, and then I could take questions. I can also go on about any of these particular things more. Some of this stuff I've touched on. Again, people will often ask me who know about Shimer College, it is a great book school, how could you, as a radical feminist, be teaching at a great book school? And as I said, I think it's crucial that we open up our whole idea about what is legitimate academic discourse, that we open up our ideas about what counts as a great text. And I think it's equally crucial that when we read texts that say things like women are, by nature, women obey, we don't just skip that and say, stop making such a big deal about it. You know what they meant. Yeah, I know what they meant. they meant by nature women obey, and that's the way society's going to be constructed. They knew exactly what they meant. There is not a coincidence that our Western intellectual tradition denigrates people of color and women, and that we live in a current society where we have racism and patriarchy. Is not a coincidence. And it's important for us to not ignore those texts because they're important. They are our tradition. But we need to interrogate them for what they actually say and listen to other voices that are often left out. Let's see. Trying to think what else and one of the things I just want to, I guess I will read you a few quotes about what some philosophers have said. Like, for instance, Aristotle in the Politics says men are naturally superior to women, and women should be subjects, and men should rule. In the Generation of Animals, he says that the female is a mutilated male. Rousseau and Emile, I've already told you, he says, by nature man commands, I always get it backwards, and by nature women obeys. Hegel in the Philosophy of Right, women drop out of the ethical sphere, women stay in the private realm, men go off into the public realm. Not surprisingly and very interesting, one of the anthologies that's often used with Hegel takes the 2 paragraphs out where women drop out of the dialectic. So therefore you're reading along and you're like, this is fine, because we're so used to reading man as human that we're just assuming he means women too, and we don't attend to where they drop out, and it's so insignificant that we don't even include the paragraphs in the anthology. Freud and Civilization says women represent a retarding and restraining influence on civilization. So again, does that mean we don't read these texts? Absolutely not. Does that mean that these texts don't also have really important things to teach us? No. I love these texts. I am an academic philosopher. It means that we need to understand certain ideas of justice that are articulated in these texts, but we also need to interrogate some of the forms of oppression that are also embedded within them. And I think that's a crucial aspect of academia. That also means it's crucial to add more text by other voices so that we can hear other perspectives on how we situate ourselves intellectually in our Western tradition. And I guess I just want to say a quick thing. This is the last thing. Yes. About that, I just want to comment. I asked Eric if it was okay about the poster. And I greatly appreciate the person who did the art for the poster. I just wanted to point out something that really struck me. When I first became a feminist, for years I wore a fist, and I wore a feminist fist. And I want to say that after 25 years of being an academic feminist and an activist, it's crucial to me to unclench that fist and open my arms and say, feminism is about embracing our humanity. And I think I feel very strongly about that. And it's not about women versus men and the fist. It means, and embracing and working together does not mean being soft and passive. I'm no less radical because I've unclenched my fist. It means that I see the radical action in working together as a collective. So that's what I have, and then I want to take questions. And to me, it's a constant reminder of this real push by our society to keep asserting a dichotomy. That the male, and then if you look, just look at the costumes. Go to, well, don't buy anything, but go to like Costco or